why and how has the modern university become such a centre of crisis and conflict? And how and why has the teaching of history in our time, it seems, become an area of ethical debate, finger-wagging moral philosophy? To discuss these two related subjects today, the Erasmus Forum is very delighted to have one of its very good friends, corresponding fellow of the Erasmus Forum, Julio Crespo-MacLennan, whose essay on the problems of the modern university and the origins of the university in history can be read in Volume 10 now of the Erasmus Forum Bulletin. Julio, you have significant experience of teaching in the modern contemporary university in America and now in Madrid. And of course, you cast an experienced historian's eye over these matters. I remember growing up in a provincial town in the 1970s, surrounded, it seems, almost exclusively by clergy, teachers and lecturers of various stripe. And in our green and very pleasant suburb, the people who lived in the very pleasant, large detached houses were the university professors. And that local university had quite a small population in those days, about 3,000 or 4,000 or so. But looking at the modern university now, these things look very different to us. That rather cool, calm, some people would say remote, academic in the good as well as in the bad sense of the word, that seems to have disappeared. And along with it, it's become a new strain of invective in the teaching of history. When I was growing up and when I started teaching and lecturing and writing history, it seemed quite axiomatic that one taught and one thought about history in order to think imaginatively into a past that was very different from the present. You had to suspend moral judgment. The goal is not to preach, but to understand. And that seems to be very much under threat now. But we might come back to that later on, Julio. But to begin with, where are we now, do you think, in the modern university? What are the problems? Why has it become such a conflicted area?
Thank you very much. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here in the Erasmus Forum, which plays such an important role in contributing to the understanding of key issues of the 21st century. And of course, university life is one of them, because we must understand that universities is one of the pillars of the Western world. And it's also one of the key ideas that has made Europe and the Western world what it is. And I would say that it's one of the key contributions that it's made to the global civilization that is emerging in the 21st century. And of course, analyzing the history of universities is fascinating, because it's actually analyzing the history of the great ideas that shaped the world, and some of the theories that have marked human progress are in university life. So going to the if I can try and answer briefly your question about the problems of university life at present, I would summarize the problems in two key words: technology on the one hand, and politics on the other.
Yes, a very unhappy combination.
So we have to understand these two terms. And if I can go into further detail about them, this very much explain why university life changes so much from that idyllic setting that you've described in your youth.
There's one word that's also very important when we're looking at the history of the university, and that word is autonomy.
Yeah.
Universities were places that ran themselves.
Yes.
And they emerge, if we just think about Europe, in the 11th and the 12th centuries, and they emerge from the cathedral schools.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And congregations of masters and scholars established themselves, and they were the modern university. An university, universitas, being understood as equivalent to our word community, really, is what they were. And it's that autonomy that has become very threatened as well in our time, hasn't it? With students, and sometimes, the grandest professors being regarded as fodder in a kind of mercantile exchange of information.
Yes, very much. We have to understand the origins of university and why this managed to set the Western world apart, because this was a community of academics and students that emerges in the medieval world. And of course, this is very important because there was nothing like it in any other civilization.
No.
We have to take into consideration, of course, that this does not mean that only the Western world is capable of creating educational institutions, but the university itself is very different from anything that other civilizations have.
Yeah, other civilizations have produced what we might call institutes of higher learning.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
The Lyceum
Yes.
and the Academy
Yes.
in Athens, time of Aristotle and Plato.
Yes.
And ancient Indian civilization
Yes.
has produced these institutes of the higher learning.
Yes.
But teaching, organized teaching, is really a matter for the modern university as it emerges in the 11th, 12th centuries, I think. Isn't it?
That's right. Yes.
From Bologna onwards.
Yes. Well, of course, it's very important that we can that the medieval world lays the foundation of university life, because it's very important that we have something that is independent from religious authorities, although, of course, at this time this was very challenging. But the crucial difference is that they were autonomous institutions. Popes, kings, or emperors granted these institutions the license to give degrees, secular and non-secular. And then you had academic specialized in different subjects. So this is very important, of course, the fact that you have specialists, and at the same time that these specialists are to a large extent independent, because in the, for example, in the Muslim world, I was recently in Morocco, that claims to have one of the oldest universities in the world. But of course, this is not quite a university. This evolves from a madrasa, which is different, because it was very much under the surveillance of the religious authorities. And of course, in the Chinese world, well, they had their systems to educate the very good elites.
Yes, the Confucian elites.
Yes, and this made a very important role. This played a very important role in the Chinese civilization, but it was different. What we have in the Western world is this independence, which then, of course, evolves in the 18th and 19th century into what we can describe as modern universities. This is very much what happens in the Germanic world, Berlin, for example. That's very much where we have the beginning of modern universities, in the sense that we have the idea of objective pursuit.
Yeah, research, in other words.
Yes.
And the idea of the university as a place which does organized teaching,
yes,
and which does organized research as well,
exactly,
advances the frontiers of knowledge. These two things march hand in hand.
Yes.
Important to remember, of course, that these universities, as they develop, especially in the 19th century, they're not in some kind of empyrean, divorced from society. They have a very, very important social function, just as the university in the late Middle Ages and in the early modern period had an important role in educating the clergy
Yes.
In the 19th century, you've got this new phenomenon of the clerisy, the as it were clerical influence, governmental bureaucratic class.
Yes.
So that, for example, the study of organized English history
Yes.
in Oxford reflected the need to produce an academic elite that was able to understand the past and to serve the present, seeing the connection between past and present, that there was an arc, as it were, to the history of England specifically, and that these people are being trained in that art in order to become more effective civil servants. And the development of the modern university in the 19th century is part of that, isn't it?
Yes, that's very much a summary of what modern university is. We have to understand three very important aspects of modern university. The first one I would say is the fact that these academics who were started to be specialized, and this is an idea that begins in medieval world, then it becomes much more elaborate at that time. First of all, you have proper academics being paid for what they do. This is very important because obviously they needed to earn a living. And this makes a very important contribution to the development of all kinds of theories and ideas. And at the same time, they felt that they were independent. That means that whatever they publish, they will not be punished for this in any way. So this is a very important aspect. Then, of course, this pursuit of this intellectual inquiry leads to a much more complex understanding of the contemporary world. And it's at that time that we have the creation of many subjects. Many
knowledge becomes parceled out.
Yes,
doesn't it?
exactly.
And
yes.
there are departments of.
Yes. Yep.
For the first time, departments of English literature,
yes.
departments of history,
exactly,
and the development of the natural sciences,
yes.
departments of biology, zoology, and all
Correct.
that.
Yes.
But all contained within the idea of the community of
yes.
scholars.
Yes, yeah.
Which kind of brings people together.
Yeah.
And especially in the context of the smaller university in the provinces that I was thinking about earlier, you could have conversations between a botanist and a theologian and a zoologist and an historian. But to go back to that Sylvan scene that I was presenting to you earlier on in the 1970s, quite a comfortable world for academics, I think, at that time. And the professor was a person of considerable social significance.
Yes.
And comparatively really rather well paid as well, which is an important feature of all of this.
Absolutely.
And if we look at the university now, it seems to me there's a lot of resentment, of course, about salaries. People are not paid comparatively as much as they used to be paid. And then there's this querulous demand about the university somehow serving social purpose in a very finger-wagging way. But we might come on to the influence of history and history teaching on all of this later on. But let's just think about how things have changed more generally. The university of the late 20th century, 70s and 80s, and now, 30, 40 years later. What strikes you as being really different?
Yes, we have to understand this to a certain extent degradation of university life from this world in which academics lived in an ivory tower to a certain extent, and there was this community that was very important. I also have this impression from my days as an undergraduate in Oxford, which I feel is the late 80s, early 90s, a transition period. It's still a world that has not been corrupted by technology, and there's this very healthy interaction of academics, students, constant exchange of ideas that made the networks so important. Because I think this is another key that has made university so important.
I think that the depth of specialist knowledge has been bought at a certain cost.
Yes. Yeah.
The difficulty that people in different departments have in talking to each other about subjects that they ought to have in common.
Yes.
So you might be reading a poem about the problems of rural societies in early modern England, shall we say, the enclosure movement, all of that, formation of large estates, poor law, and then you start thinking, well, how is this reflected in the literature of the period? How is it reflected in the Shakespearean texts, for example? How is it reflected in ballads and ballads of social protest? Now, if you're an undergraduate and you really start thinking in that way, you're about to get a bit frustrated, I think, if you go up to Dr. X, who's been teaching you all this business about the enclosures and ground riots, and say, well, how about the literary aspect of all of this?
Yes.
And I say, oh, well, I'm afraid, Williams, you're going to have to wait until the start of next term for that, because Dr. Campbell's going to come in, and he's a specialist, and he's going to be talking about all this. Now, this is a great loss, I think, the inability to connect.
Yes, it is. And of course, we have to understand that this world that you're describing, perhaps one of the key elements that made it so rich is that students were reading well beyond the subjects very often. We were encouraged to read a lot, and things that were not necessarily related to a subject.
But that might become related to a subject if you went down that particular path.
Exactly, yes. You just learn how to interlink many subjects. And of course, libraries played a very important role. I remember...
The library.
Yeah.
The lots of the library.
Yes, the library as a university institution. I remember perhaps the happiest moments of my life I spent in working in libraries in Oxford, because libraries, you were surrounded by bookshelves very much like this, and this very much stimulates your curiosity, and you just...
you reach down a book from the shelf and you think, I didn't realize that.
This book is interesting, and you just start browsing. And this very much encouraged students to read beyond the subject, which is something that you don't get nowadays in the days of the internet. And this takes us to the world of
the problems of technology.
Problems of technology is that I'm not I'm very much in favor of technology as long as we know how to use it.
Yes.
And of course, internet is a wonderful tool.
It's a great provider of sources.
Exactly.
If you know where to look.
Yes, that's
and how to look.
Yes. But otherwise, if you don't know how to look, then it very much ends up corrupting the essence of intellectual pursuit of knowledge. Because the way before the internet students learned subjects thoroughly, this is being lost because, of course, it's very easy to access information.
Yeah, but what do you do with information?
What do you do with that information?
That's the big problem, isn't it?
That's the paradox that we're finding now, is that students that have, it's amazing when you think about it. I mean, it's not just a student, but a peasant in the middle of Africa nowadays with a mobile phone more or less has the same information that a 20th century US president would have.
Yes.
But of course, the key is, how do you process it? What do you do with it?
Yeah.
And this is
how to think.
Yes.
Really.
And this is where
and how to train the mind in understanding. Exactly. And I think this is one of the big problems in the contemporary teaching and writing of history.
Yes.
If we move on to the second aspect of our discussion now.
So that's one aspect. But if I can remind you of another key element of what has made university life very different is, of course, the technological aspect is one. The politics aspect is another. And of course, we have to understand that there is a transition from a university that used to teach elites to a university that teaches the masses. And this is a transition that takes place in the second half of the 20th century, particularly the last two decades and the early 21st century. And of course, this changes things.
Well, it does change everything.
Yes, in a very radical way, because going to university is the aspiration of most families.
Yeah.
And, the government very much supports this by first opening new public universities and at the same time providing the means for students to go to university.
And it also pretends through its fee structure
Yeah.
And the salaries for vice-chancellors
Yes.
in this country, which can be astonishingly high.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It reflects the fact that they regard all universities as somehow the same.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're in a university with, say, 10 to 15,000 students, you're all on a level somehow or other, and a vice-chancellor would be paid exactly the same.
Yes.
Regardless of the academic distinction of the university is concerned. This, it seems to me, is a very big problem.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And pretending that all universities are the same and that all faculties and departments are somehow competing on, revert to that old cliche, the level playing field. Well, they clearly are different.
Yes.
It used to be said, more is worse. There's a famous English novelist called Kingsley Amis who said this once. Well, we've certainly got more and more and more. But there are questions about the provision and whether what people are getting for their money is actually good enough. And I think, the recent COVID pandemic, when students had to stay in their halls of residence or at home and be taught, through Zoom and contacts and all that. I mean, this was a real problem, and it shone a light on how bad university teaching can be.
Yes.
Very lacking individuality, lacking real supervision, more like a teaching of vast classes of people, very superficially in many cases.
Yes.
Particular problem with people doing master's degrees.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. But of course, you've touched on some of the key aspects that has transformed university. And of course, the politics of universities as mass institutions that educate the masses radically changes this world that we've described before, particularly the life of an academic.
Yes.
The life of an academic has evolved from being something that is very vocational and that is a somewhat idyllic life to a life of, it's become very much a job that is not that different to working in a bank or working in a government department.
You're being invigilated all the time.
Exactly.
People want to know what you're doing with your time.
Yes.
And there are more and more boxes that you've got to tick.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Diversity, inclusion, all of that stuff as well. And the amount of time that you have that you can spend on proper teaching, proper lecturing, the communication of knowledge between the generations, which is the core function of an university, educational establishment. That becomes increasingly difficult to keep as a show on the road.
Absolutely. There were two essential aspects of an academic career, which are research and publishing. And of course, the teaching was very important, but it was to a certain extent a means to an end, because it allows academics to interact and learn also a lot from students. That is also very important. It's not only in one direction, it's in two directions. But academics are more and more burdened with administration. Which explains why there's more good historians or specialists from other fields that are simply no longer in university because they just feel that university life is becoming incompatible with
the life of the mind.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So that's a great paradox, and we find that university is not what it used to be. in that aspect. Then, of course, another very dangerous aspect of the politics of university.
Ideology.
Yes, we're getting now into ideology and our university serving a political purpose. And this, of course, is dangerous because the university, as we knew it traditionally, was an independent institution.
Well, the university, as it emerged from the shadow of the cathedral, was originally an institution that really serviced the church more than any other single body. I suppose the household government of medieval kings as well. But undergraduates were there to be trained theologically.
Yes.
And the stage of emancipation, as it were, from that to the 19th century, was to a far greater area of independence and freedom. But now doctrines, no longer theological, but secular doctrines, they're back, aren't they, in a very big way?
Yes.
And they govern what we have to do in the modern university.
Yes, and this, of course, is another of the keys to understand why university world has got into this mess, because university was not meant to be following any political agenda or any political correctness. That's the other.
Well, that's the big thing, isn't it?
That is very dangerous.
Political correctness, and its late and very sorry cousin, woke.
Yes, right.
Stalks the corridors of the modern university.
Yes, wokeism is a very. We can say that it's the ultimate consequence of political correctness.
It's much easier to teach, of course. Much easier to do a kind of research.
Yes.
If you know what you want to say already, if your mind is in chains, if your mind is really enclosed within the assumptions of enclosed with the assumptions of your class or your nation or your region or your church, and it's a wonderful shortcut. That's a kind of apologia for wokeism. There's a lot of information around.
Yes.
Technology has given us tons and tons and tons of the stuff. We don't really know what to do with it all. And this is as true of teachers, academics, as it is of undergraduates. So wokeism, in a way, it's popular because at least it gives you an answer, tells you what to think straight away.
Yes, it does tell you what to think, but the sadness of wokeism is that it prevents students from developing a critical mind, from critically analyzing the world, which is one of the beauties of the university world, and this is what made it so popular for young people from all over the world, is because is this time of your life before you go into the real world when you can analyze things critically, study any subject and try and develop your own ideas, because this is what good universities do. They encourage students to develop your own ideas. I'm not going to tell you what to think, because this is indoctrination, and the indoctrination is something that should never be acceptable in universities.
The development of history, as a research subject, as a teaching subject, in the universities of the 19th century, and especially the German universities, is one of the great stories, I think, of European intellectual history. Very much connected, of course, with von Ranke, Berlin, but a whole area of scholarship and thought. And it was a real emancipation, because it told people, look, the past is different from the present. You can't interpret the past through just the lens of the present. Of course, you can never completely get to a kind of objective universal knowledge, but at least try and liberate yourself from the shackles of the present. Try and think yourself into the mind of another person. I mean, this was, in a way, it was quite as much a kind of literary and empathetic exercise as it was one of the professional scholar historians. Try and understand what it's like to be another person. And if you're trying to do that, putting a sledgehammer on it all and saying, this is what it means, and this is what it means to us now, and that's all there is to be said about it. Now, this was a huge intellectual liberation, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree. And obviously, it very much you have to understand this setting of intellectual pursuit, objective intellectual pursuit. And that's when, the development of history as a subject emerged, in which it was very much understood that, history is that the past is a foreign land, and it's a foreign country.
It's its own place,
and they do things differently there, and this is what you have to understand, and that's how you got such good historical study, which of course is incompatible with what we're getting now from this idea of political correctness, in which you have a political agenda that needs to be imposed, and this means interpreting history from the perspective of our own political aims.
Now, you see, some people would say, this is what being a progressive really means. It's an agenda of progress, and as we come to understand ourselves more, we can use more and more information about the past, and we can back up what we think now with evidence from the past. We know what we want to research, and we'll pick these bits up, and we'll trample on history in the way that suits us. But I rather think, that what parades itself as progressive is in fact a form of reaction.
Yes.
It's very, very reactionary view of the past. So we've gone back, as it were, to the old providentialism.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it says, well, this is what history means. And first of all, there's Babylon, and then there's Greece, and then there's Rome, and then there's Europe and Europeanness, and this leads up to the present. And it's providence as the hand of God for the past, but now providence in the form of dogmatism.
Yes, absolutely, yes. Which, of course, it can be understood that you do learn lessons from the past, and you do try to learn from the past. Mm-hmm. And this is in relation to the Whig interpretation of history to a certain extent, but this has nothing to do with this idea of projecting the prejudices of the present world into the past. And what is even worse of this progressive agenda is that we see the emergence of a 21st century Inquisition.
People losing their jobs.
Yes, this is very interesting, because you say this is what we think, and whoever does not think that this is correct will be penalized for this. Yeah. This is a new Inquisition, and of course that's where the rise of the cancellation policy comes, where people lose their jobs, people are cancelled in the way that they used to be in Stalinist Russia. Yes. You just disappear. All of a sudden, you don't exist. Well, this is very dramatic. And this is what university life is becoming in the 21st century. Very worrying indeed.
So perhaps forms of teaching, lecturing, thinking, especially about the past, perhaps the movement now is to really independent institutions, like the Erasmus Forum.
Absolutely. Yes, that's one of the great contributions that Erasmus Forum is making, is that you do need independent institutions trying to understand the past, trying to ask key questions, and having specialists talking freely about a wide range of subjects without any pressure and without any indoctrination.
See, I think you can use information about the past in a present-day context, but only if you bring a greater sense of perspective and depth to that present-day concern. Because if you're just saying, oh, this happened in the past, that's a lesson, and we can apply it now. Well, the point about a lesson, it's very, very objective, isn't it? 3 times 3 equals 9 in all and every civilizations. Right. But the lessons that people learn from the past, they vary enormously, don't they? And different people think that they can derive different kinds of knowledge from the same subject.
Yes.
I mean, take the Glorious Revolution, so-called Glorious Revolution in Britain. 1688-9. At the time, nobody thought it was glorious, really. It took Macaulay in the 19th century, the big historians, to describe this rather desperate constitutional kind of fix as something that was glorious and predestined. In fact, you can say that it's not the cornerstone of liberties for the rest of the 19th and 20th centuries in Britain. It's just a reflection of the 17th century conflicts, and it's just restated stuff from the Petition of Right and so on. I mean, it's very easy, isn't it, to invent ideas about the past and then forget that they're just like stepping stones or kind of aids to understanding. And if we forget just how they've been invented for a particular purpose, they're not there forever. They've always got to be interpreted, reinterpreted. Perhaps.
Absolutely.
As universities become more and more formalized, more and more structured in their attitudes towards what can be said and what cannot be said, they may still end up being academic places with a curriculum and all the rest of it. But being academic does not necessarily mean the same thing as being intellectual. And this, I think, is a defining problem of the modern university. They are the academies. They think that they're serving a social purpose. In fact, they're rather destroying themselves with their kind of ideas about what can count as knowledge. And de-intellectualizing themselves, they pose a kind of nihilistic presence in our contemporary world.
Yes, I mean this evolution of the academic world is very interesting because they are the word is de-intellectualizing, and at the same time they are contributing to the emergence of a new type of citizen that is quite worrying for the Western world. I would describe it as something like a new managerial world in which you have citizens who are just thinking about, in a very pragmatic way. They think, okay, my aim is very much to get into the real world, get a job, and I don't really care about developing an independent mind. I mean, it's very much like being a pawn.
Yes.
But that's all right as long as you find your place.
Who's my line manager?
Yes, exactly. That's very much
one of the
what it is.
defining questions of modern civilization.
Very much in line with what is happening in China. China is very much like that. So you don't create citizens who are independent with their own opinion. They just become pawns. Very often very successful ones, and they can do very well, but that's different to what university life used to be.
The remorseless rise of the manager.
Yes, exactly.
Which is so much a part of modern life. I mean, we see it in this country, in the National Health Service. We see it in government departments. Everything is managed rather than really understood.
Exactly, yes.
And the use of the word professional to describe somebody who's just keeping his or her kind of nose clean, you know?
Yes.
Not just, putting in the boxes and filling in the boxes properly and not really thinking about what one is doing, you know? Being reliable in a rather low-grade kind of way and not causing problems. That, it seems to me, is what most people mean by the word, he, she, very professional.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, which explains why university world is increasingly similar to banking or the civil service, because it's losing this intellectual curiosity and this independence.
And this may be related to another significant feature in contemporary life, the big institution that is resistant to criticism.
Yes.
And when things go badly wrong, as they always will do in a big organization, corporation, I mean, post office, for example, in our country now, they find it impossible to accept the criticism. They will cover up, and they will not hear a really stringent word of criticism, except in the last resort when, of course, the whole show is collapsing anyway.
Yes.
As has been happening in the Church of England here recently.
Yes, well, you're describing university life in most of the Western world. That's very much how it's working. So I think the element, the only way of solving this would be to go back to the basics of what was university life, what were the aims, and how do you make sure that citizens develop their own independence and their capacity to think, which is what made the Western world what it has been. Independence.
And so far as history is concerned, the whole point of thinking and studying the past is to remind ourselves of how different the present is from the past.
Absolutely.
And if we lose that sense of difference,
then
we're not really thinking historically anymore.
No, not at all, no. And what is even worse is to expect modern historians to punish those who, the great protagonists of the past, which is another thing that is becoming very popular now. Let's just make certain countries to pay for what they did in the past.
Well, it's the historian as a grand inquisitor, isn't it? And coming up and pointing a finger and saying, it's not very good what you're doing.
Yes.
And we've seen this, of course, in your own country with the Spanish left.
Absolutely.
Colonizing its own version of history.
Yes, the historic memory law is a way by which the government pretends to impose an idea of how to interpret what happened in the Spanish Civil War and the Franco dictatorship. And of course, this is the opposite of what was decided in the 1970s during the transition to democracy, when it was decided that after such a traumatic chapter of history, the best thing was to forgive and forget and leave history to the historians. Very important. The government should not be getting into this, should not be indoctrinating.
Yes.
And of course, this is not only Spain. There's many countries in Europe that have had traumatic periods of history. And the best that can be done is always to leave history to the historians.
Well, history is propaganda, one of the great recurring dangers and threats of our time. Well, thank you, Julio, for coming all this way from Madrid to discuss this with us in the second of our new series of podcasts. Thank you very much. And readers of the Erasmus Forum Bulletin can read your thoughts on this matter now.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss the problems of university life. Thank you.
Until the next time.
Thank you. A great pleasure.